Next, next slide, please. So, briefly, in introduction, Dr. Bijay Kumar Panda sir has completed his post-graduation from very renowned university, that is Jadavpur University from the Kolkata. He has a very rich academic experience of 13 years and a research experience of 10 years. He has a very nice research background, especially in the clinical area, and which can reflected with the 30 international research articles as well as the systemic reviews, along with the 10 national publications in the various peer-reviewed journals. Along with that, Dr. Pandasar has an author of more than 50 oral as well as the paper presentation, the various international as well as the national conferences. Along with that, in this he has secured best scientific research presentations in the various international conferences. One of the very well-known book, that is Community Pharmacist for a New Age Pharmacist. He is going to be one of the co-author of this book. Along with that, he is working as a chief editor of a PharmaViz, which is one of the official newsletter of a clinical pharmacy of Pune College of Pharmacy. Also, sir has a very member in the various boards, just like NABH in the Bharati Hospital. Along with that, the clinical pharmacy department. He has mainly involved in the operational research project for the tuberculosis, which is going to be one of the sanctioned RNTCP, which is center is there by the government of Maharashtra. And specifically, he has a core research, especially in the clinical studies, along with the pharmacoepidemiology, pharmacoeconomics, drug efficacy, safety studies, and the various analytical method developments. And more than 46 PharmD students he has guided. And along with that, he has coordinated various QIPs under the under the Pune College of Pharmacy, and also the research person in the various international and the national conferences as well as the symposia. And he is a very well-known speaker, especially in the refresher courses, which are going to be organized by the Maharashtra State Council, Pharmacy Council throughout the states. So on behalf of this very much brief introduction, I welcome to Mr. Panda sir, and I request you to share his, especially the experiences in this, especially in the clinical pharmacy area. Over to you, Panda sir.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ashwin Mari sir, for giving such a nice introduction. Though I have not completed my doctorate, but you have already declared that, so I take it as a positive note, and definitely I will just soon achieve that. Fine. So today's QIP topic, what we are going to, or I am going to cover for this, is evidence-based medicine and its role in medication safety. Evidence-based medicine, if we talk about, the word itself gives us a very clear-cut idea that a practice which could be related to evidence. And we know if anything is not documented, that is not considered to be valid in medicine. So documentation is very important. Evidence is a very legal term. If you see in law and practice, evidence is you need to have something on paper written, and when that written thing is followed, then we see the outcome, and we find out that what is the outcome of that particular evidences which are available in the society or in the scientific field. So to start with, the facts, why this EBM came into existence, or what made this EBM to come into existence. The very important fact is like over-treatment. And over-treatment is unwelcoming. It is pervasive in medicine. And we know that over-treatment can actually lead to many harms to patient, as well as to their physical need and in terms of excessive costs in healthcare. There are various factors associated with overtreatment, if you look, and particularly in Indian context, if you look, the financial incentives, malpractice concerns, then performance metrics, practice culture, time constraints, these all actually contribute to your overtreatment. 15 years, past 15 years, if you see, the drug costs have escalated at a higher rate. And if we look at COVID-19 situation now, a person who enters into ICU or into a medical care, he comes back with a bill of at least a minimum of ward treatment near to 1 to 2 lakhs, or if ICU treatment 4, 5, 8, 10, depend upon the severity. So cost has escalated like anything. Overuse, underuse, inappropriate use, these are the concerns with medications. And they can contribute to your quality of treatment. And quality with respect to, if I talk, it is not only in terms of treatment outcome, it could be in terms of cost as well. Many of these problems are preventable in nature. We can prevent it if the practice is guided through evidence. That is what the researchers have come up with that. And that's why this EBM term came into existence. Now, let's go back to the scenario where we know that thalidomide incidences, and there were various incidences that led to the role of FDA expansion and approval processes, then post-marketing pharmacovigilance systems coming into existence and documentations. But there are certain limitations in FDA drug approval process. If you see, the FDA review determines if a drug is effective and has an acceptable safety. Okay, so for that, they go back into all those studies which has been done, particularly randomized controlled trials. And through those study reports, based on those study reports, they actually allow the drug to come into the market. But it does not look into the matter of where the drug is being prescribed. See, controlled environment prescribing and prescribing in usual clinical practice is a very different scenarios, two different scenarios. Okay. Now, in RCTs, what happens? You only take those eligible patients who will be fit for that indication of that drug. Okay, though in clinical practice they are fit, but there are various comorbid conditions as well which is lying, and there are various co-medications also within that which can influence the patient treatment outcome. Taking into account, we should not forget there are various subpopulations as well who receive these medications, like elderly, then if you look into like pediatrics, children's category, they also take this medication. So we do not have a detailed data on that aspect. Moreover, if you look, there are certain unanswered questions, like we don't know what could be the safety of the drugs on long-term use. What could be the safety of drug if the drug is not, if the drug is misused or abused? We don't have any answer related to like if the drug is inappropriately or the dose goes high, then what can happen? We have completely left out with those answers. Even we don't know in certain situations how a patient may behave or how the patient's body can react to the medication in a certain medical conditions, comorbid conditions, like in case of a renal impairment or a liver impairment or a cardiac impairment. We don't know, but those answers are still not there with the FDA. And we should not forget, FDA does not run like that. It requires funding, and the funding comes from industry. So coming to the actual title of the topic, like what is the evidence-based medicine? I have given you it shows that we have a clinical judgment, we have relevant scientific evidence, we have patient values and preferences. Okay. And this EBM was actually coined by Saket Diel. He is the founder father of the terminology EBM. And if you see, all these aspects are interconnected. So EBM basically tries to find out the best possible evidences in absolute qualitative and quantitative terms, okay, and in time horizon aspects, and correlates with the clinical judgment. See, we cannot just go by scientific evidence. We require the judgment of a clinician as well. Uh, it is not like a blindfold. Okay, it is there written, we have to follow. No, even the clinical judgment also play a clinician's judgment also play a very important role, because individual risk profile is there, and whatever EBM you will see, it is like a general guideline which is given. Individual practice depends on a clinician's judgment. And the third aspect which it coordinates is your patient values, because ultimately the stakeholder who is going to receive the treatment, they are the patient. So their decision is very important. Their preferences are very important. Okay. So these terms are very much related to EBM, like conscientious, explicit, judicious, and reasonable use, because all these terms will actually help to make the EBM successful. So to summarize EBM, if we see, it is a process to identify and use the available scientific evidence, which will help a clinician, even a pharmacist who is, whether he is a clinical pharmacist, whether he is a hospital pharmacist, in decision-making process. Now, where those decision-making process will be, it could be directly to the patient care. It could be in the policy making also, okay, in the formulary making systems. We always teach students about a committee which decides of the formulary. Okay, so that policy making body also takes the help of the scientific evidence. So as I told you in the previous slide, scientific evidence is integrated process, number one. Number two, it is a continuous process, because evidences are always getting generated every year. So updation is very much required, right? So it is an integrated and updated and continuous process of clinical judgment, patient's unique circumstances, so that finally whatever is delivered, that delivery is the best in terms of clinical decisions. Okay. Now, what will be the outcome then? Now, suppose I am giving or treating a patient who is having a long-standing diabetes, whose glycosidated hemoglobin is not controlled. Then through scientific evidences, I came to acquire one drug which could be really beneficial. Then after that, I introduced that drug to that patient, and I would like to see whether the outcome was there or not. Okay, through follow-up. Now, there are certain steps of evidence-based practice. So we can see like there are 5 steps. We call it as 5A. Okay, 5A process. So the 5A process starts from ask. Okay. So the second is acquire, appraise, apply, and finally you need to audit. So if this cycle, if you look, this cycle again comes back to the patient. You ask the patient, you try to convert anything into a question which needs an answer. Okay, so converting anything, any information which you gather, whether it could be a physical information, it could be laboratory information, okay, it could be any specialized investigation information. And then after talking or communicating with the patient, you rather try to, after taking the history, you rather try to formulate a question. Then you track down for the best evidence, that is called as acquire. So you go through various resources from where you will get those informations or evidences. And after that, what you need to do, you need to appraise that, you need to evaluate it. Okay, so critically find out that whether whatever evidences you have collected, then you try to see those evidences, the validity, the impact, the applicability of those, and then you try to apply it. Integrate all those, formulate an answer, apply on the, make a clinical decision, and with the help of the patient, because patient decision is very important. Okay, so that's why if you see the practice differs, practice in Indian scenario and practice in Western world differs. There a patient is told about everything, he is explained about everything. Even if a small procedure you are going to do on that patient, you need to explain him what is that procedure, why you are doing that, and what will be the impact of that procedure. After that, the patient will be the decision maker. In Indian context, what we do, we very less communication is there between the patient and the physician. Okay, only at the time of very critical situations like surgery and all, you take or inform them and take their consent on the consent form. So, but here it applies in every setting. It applies in the OPD setting, it applies in the IPD setting, it applies in the family physician medicine also. And then after that, you apply it to the patient, you give that drug, follow that patient, audit, and see whether it is giving the outcome or not. So that is this is in a brief 5 steps of evidence-based practice. And to develop the skills of EBM, anyone requires access to evidence. Number one, that accessibility he should know. Next, opportunity should be there to practice it. If you don't have that opportunity, obviously going into those EBM or going into those databases is useless. You know, if you don't practice, it is of no use. And you need to have time, because asking is okay, fine, everybody does that. After that, the step comes question formation and finding those evidences and critically appraising those evidences. These 2 steps, it requires time. Ask and apply, you will usually see in every clinical situation, but acquire and appraise does not happen much. And this 2 process or steps requires lot of time. So time should be there so that you can finally make an answer and then apply it. Now, what are the questions or what related questions can be answered through EBM? So it could be like the problem, the diagnosis or the disease. What is the prevalence of that disease? That could be one question. Question could be like screening process, detection. How worthwhile is that detection? Whatever screening procedures we go through, lab or X-rays, or we go through USGs, sonographies, we go through MRIs, CT scans. So how worthwhile is that? Like in COVID-19 situations, we came across that those kits, PCR versus those kits which are coming up. How far those kits are really helpful in diagnosing, or how sensitive and specific are those in diagnosing those processes? Okay, so diagnostic test. Then what will happen if we do nothing? Prognosis. What will be the outcome? Okay, and any intervention done, an intervention which was a standard therapy, like I'll tell you, like in a situation of standard care, a symptomatic management of a COVID-19 patient, and then you think of that if I go for hydroxychloroquine, if I go for chloroquine, if I go for various antiviral drugs, what will happen? So that is an intervention. So does this intervention help? If that is your question, then EBM could actually help you. And the final part is your harms or a safety. Okay, and any intervention which is done during that intervention process or off late after the intervention or long term, what could be the side effects, what could be the adverse effects of that intervention. So the questions related to all this could be answered through a EBM process. Now, the next thing applies over here is searchable. How you are going to search, how you are going to create a question. Okay, now there are two types of question. One is your background and another one is your foreground. Now, what is the basic difference between these two? See, background question is very generalized. It's like how, what, why, when. Okay, and it is related to some aspect of the patient care. Okay, how do you treat, or what are the medications indicated for this hypertension, or what are the side effects? These are very generalized questions. Now, when these questions are converted into a specific need, like if I want to ask that what could be the side effects of vaccine which is now being introduced in COVID-19 situation. Now I am getting it to be very specific. Okay. Now if I go to more specific, I could lead to like what are the basic difference of adverse effects of Covaxin and Covishield. That becomes another very specific question. So that such type of questions are known as your foreground questions. Okay, these are specific questions, and these specific questions require a definition, and those definitions are fulfilled by a PICO, abbreviated form like PICO acronym form. Now, what is this PICO? So P stands for the patient or the problem or the population about which I am concerned, or about the patient which I am concerned. Okay. Next comes the intervention. See, intervention can be anything. It could be a herbal intervention. It could be a vaccine intervention. It could be a drug intervention. It could be any formulation intervention. Even I can go for like oral versus IV also. Okay, so my intervention was like intranasal. So intranasal could be your intervention. So even a formulation based intervention can also be can be evaluated, or the evidences can be required. Next comes comparison. With what we are comparing. Like I told, if I am comparing a drug with his formulation of oral versus IV, or IV versus intranasal, or intranasal versus subcutaneous. Like now insulin, we are thinking like it is, they are saying that probably in few years, insulin will come into market where it will be taken intranasally. So intranasal insulin versus subcutaneous insulin, which one is better? Okay. So that could be a comparison, or at most the comparison could be with placebo. And if you look into various trials, placebo is taken as a standard comparator. Okay. And finally is your outcome. In what terms you are defining the outcome. Okay. Now outcome could be anything. I'll give you a simple example of an outcome. Like if I am going for a drug which is antihypertensive, my outcome will be your systolic blood pressure or diastolic blood pressure reduction, mean reductions. Okay. If I am going for like hemoglobin levels, if I am going for albumin levels, if I am going for any inflammatory mediators, that could be the outcome level, right? Or virulence, that could be an outcome. In case like of your, then it comes your time. Now, at what time you are giving, and the settings, at what settings. Settings in the sense, it could be like OPD setting, it could be IPD setting, it could be ICU setting. Okay, even these settings, even a home care setting also. So that those are various settings where you are using. So how that setting, in those settings, what can be done? I'll give you an example of settings. In status epilepticus situations, a parent at a home, he cannot give intravenous anti-epileptic drugs. Now, in that setting, which formulation can be effective enough to control? Formulation of an anti-epileptic will be effective enough to control. So probably if you look, it could be like your intranasal. Midazolam can be beneficial in that situation. Okay, so if that parent goes to a OPD or a small consultant he visits, at that consultancy level, what formulation will be beneficial in controlling that status epilepticus at that moment, so that till the ambulance comes and take the patient to the hospital. So these are the various settings, the drug, the formulation which will be beneficial. So these are various foreground questions which can be answered by completing this PICO acronym format. Am I audible? Thank you. Next is, so we will go in detail of foreground, how to formulate a question. Okay. Now, suppose the case is like Mr. X, who is a 58-year-old obese man suffering from non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Now, what is your foreground question, basically? A foreground question could be like whether the drug metformin could be used to improve his condition as measured by lowering his glycosylated hemoglobin. Now, if I put this whole thing into a PICO format, so my patient is obese, adult, suffering from non-insulin diabetes mellitus. Intervention is metformin. Comparator, as I am not thinking about any other drug, so my comparator will be placebo. And outcome will be what? Change in glycosylated hemoglobin. That will be my outcome. Clear? So in this way, we create a PICO. In this way, this PICO originates. Similarly, any patient comes to you at a pharmacy level. So you need to fulfill these criteria to formulate this question. Now your question says that whether this drug metformin compared to a placebo is effective in controlling this or changing this glycosylated hemoglobin, okay, or not. Now your question is formed. The next step is search. Now you will start searching. Now, what are the keywords you got from here in the PICO? You achieved like obese adults, NIDDM, metformin, placebo, glycosylated hemoglobin. So my search criteria will consist of all these terms, if you look into this. And there is a term called medical subject headings. So in any of the database you go, particularly I'm talking about like we use PubMed. So in PubMed, there is a medical subject heading where you need to provide this as, and it will search related to non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Now, when we search through the databases, we get like 8 trials that appeared through the search, and we selected one of them which actually fit to our search criteria or strategy. Okay. Now, if you could see this, so this is a PubMed site. I have put a search query over here using those key terms. You will find this and, these are Boolean operators. We use and, or, not. So these are various Boolean operators which are used. After using these Boolean operators, these are filters we have. We have like abstract, if you want abstract, full text. Then you have like the date wise filtrations you can do. You can do study design type filtrations you can do. Human studies or animal studies filtration can also be done on this. Okay, so anybody can use this. Even a pharmacologist person can also use this to understand the studies which are done on preclinical based. So that can also be searched over here. So I created this search criteria over here and I tried to search and I found nearly so many results. Okay, now when I go into these results, I find a particular study. After going through these results, I found particular studies, 8 studies which are related to only metformin, because you will see over here like metformin versus sequential metformin and other things. We will not take all these studies. We will just take only metformin, non-insulin, okay, multi-center randomized trial, because I have given like RCT studies. So how many of the studies out of this 49 are related to only my search criteria? Okay, so then I will go into that study and formulate my or appraise that study. So this is the study which we have referred through, efficacy of metformin in patients with non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. This is a multi-center metformin study. Okay. After going out through this study, we will go for a study appraisal. That is our third step. So what we do basically in the critical appraisal, we read that study and we try to see whether the randomization was proper or not. So we found that the paper did not disclose the method of randomization. Therefore, we cannot eliminate the possibility of biasness. See, any study which is biased, obviously the outcome will be biased. So this randomization is a must. So if any study has actually told that how this randomization procedure was done, then probably the chances of reducing this biasness was taken by the researcher. Okay, if they have not disclosed this method of randomization, or even if they have not mentioned the randomization process clearly, then probably there is a chance or possibility is there that the introduction of bias will be there. Now, next, the baseline demographics was satisfactory because the inclusion criteria was according to our need. Ascertainment is another criteria where we see that whether there was a follow-up to this patient. So we saw that 78% in the metformin group and 72% in the placebo group, it was followed up. Measurements, our chosen outcome was glycosylated hemoglobin, whether this was one of the objective in their study or not. Okay. And blinding, whether the study was blinding, double blinding was carried out throughout the trial. So this again reduces the introduction of bias. Okay, so full double blinding was carried out throughout the trial, and again this trial was reducing the possibility of any kind of an introduction. So this was what we have finally appraised the study, and we have found out that the study is fit for analysis and forming or formulating a answer. I am just giving you a very simple example of how to actually conduct the 5 steps. Looking into the results, like now I have to interpret the results or the findings. So what I have come across, then how I will just interpret it. I have two groups like comparator placebo where 8.6%, and in metformin group the glycosylated hemoglobin measurement mean was found to be 7.1%. So obviously there was a reduction. There was a mean absolute reduction in glycosylated hemoglobin of 1.5%, which is clearly visible, bringing the patient closer to the 7% level. So obviously that is the target. Every doctor has a target of reaching towards the glycosylated hemoglobin. However, there were more side effects in the metformin group which was observed than the placebo group. And that was primarily diarrhea, which was seen. Now the implications or the final recommendation which has to be done. So based on these results, we can say that Mr. X can be treated with metformin for its non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. But the adverse effects which has to be seen is digestive side effects, which is tolerable and which could be manageable. So obviously the patient will respond to metformin for his glycosylated hemoglobin. Now, if given time, we could look for more papers to see how metformin compared with other drugs. Now, this could be the next stage. Now, suppose you apply metformin in the patient, and then you see that the patient is responding to the therapy. After a few years, the patient is not responding to that extent. You think of adding another drug. Now, if you are thinking of adding another drug, again, two questions will come out: the efficacy and safety. And to make a decision-making process, again, you need to think of the evidences. Okay. Now, where to look for in the evidence-based medicine? Now, this is a pyramid. So the more broad base you see over here. Okay, so these studies have a lesser importance, or in evidence level, they are like in 4th level or 3rd level. And as we move towards the upper part of the pyramid, to the tip of the pyramid, we get to see that these are already appraised informations, already evaluated, critically evaluated informations. Okay, like your systematic reviews, you have guidelines, you have trip searches, and electronic health records. So these are already appraised and they are well appraised evidences which can be used. And cohort, case control, case series, case reports, expert opinion, background informations, they are just the lower level of the evidences. So any guideline formation which takes place, if you just study a guideline, you'll find in the preface, you'll find there are various evidences levels are given. Like in case, if you go into our tuberculosis website of our government tuberculosis website, you'll find a guideline for TB treatment. Okay, national guideline for TB treatment, RNTCP, uh, revised national tuberculosis control program guideline. If you read that guideline for both pulmonary as well extra pulmonary, even even they have formed that recommendations or the guideline based on these evidences only, based on these studies, based on these RCTs, cohort studies, okay, based on these summaries or meta-analysis they have come across, and then only they have designed that recommendations. So this is always should be remembered, that we have to move up for the evidences. That should be always the criteria. Now again, this depends on what type of question is generated. Okay, now if you are trying to answer a very simple question of like adverse effects of a well-known drug, then obviously you will get many meta-analysis or many systematic reviews done, and you will get your answers very easily. Or otherwise you can go to a drug database and you can find out over there what are the side effects or what are the adverse effects which are known. So for a like a community pharmacy to answer for such a question, like any patient comes with a prescription and he asks him, I am going to take this drug, do these drugs have any side effects? And a pharmacist wants to refer to any evidences, then he can go to tertiary books, or he can go to a secondary database like Micromedics, or there are like Hippocrates online, where he can search for authentic adverse effects to tell the patients, which are very commonest seen, and there is nothing to worry about. So how the communication is done or how the report is disseminated, that is very important. Okay. Like I have shown you about this recommendation or implications. Okay. Now let's look into the various evidences levels. Like we will go into the RCTs. What are RCTs? These are randomized controlled trials. As the name says, controlled. It's a trial done in under a controlled environment. Okay, to find out the safety, because trials are the first priority is the safety, and the second priority is the efficacy. So that forms the evidence for evaluating a drug therapy, and this is considered to be of high quality because it is like randomized, then double blind procedure is formed, ascertainment is done. Okay, so this is considered to be one of the highest quality generated sources for your evidence sources. And fortunately, if you look, FDA requires RCTs. They don't require your observational studies, or they don't want to require your clinical trial studies. They don't believe that. They believe a complete RCT for evaluation. So any manufacturer who wants to make his drug come into the market, he has to conduct the RCTs, like in vaccine also. So without RCTs, FDA is not going to approve that drug. So, but there are certain limitations like experimental design, then inclusion exclusion criteria, because that will not reflect your general population. Obviously, that's why I told you in the very beginning that the real practice scenario is different from a RCT scenario. Okay, so you cannot generalize it is not very easy to generalize the results. So that's why if you look, FDA is always behind conducting post-marketing surveillance, because RCT, whatever data you have provided, it is okay, but still there are so many questions which are unanswered, and that has to be taken care of. And for that, this post-marketing surveillances, spontaneous reporting systems, prescription event monitoring systems, these are actually conducted to get more and more answers. And if you look, FDA also do give importance to label changes. So label changes also occurs frequently if there are certain signal generated regarding that particular drug. Okay? And many of the trials, outcome trials in chronic diseases, may take years, and RCTs are very expensive, and it requires time, efforts, individual, and a huge manpower, skilled manpower is required. Now, the other evidence is your systematic reviews, or we can call it as or meta-analysis. These are considered to be one of the topmost priority reviews done. There are two other reviews, like simple reviews, which call it as narrative review, or we call it as like reviews or simple reviews. Okay, narrative reviews or simple reviews. So systematic reviews is nothing but getting or gathering the evidences about a drug therapy and from various medical literatures, and screen them, critically evaluate them, summarize them, make it put through certain statistical procedures, and then find the specific answer for the question which has been generated. So this is particularly like basically like a qualitative assessment. You assess the quality, you assess the quantity of the research done, and then you come out with a review. So meta-analysis or systematic reviews, they are usually results of individual studies. You can find a meta-analysis done on 29 RCTs or 30 RCTs, the number of RCTs what they have found out through various searches, and then they evaluate it through a process of statistical process, and then they come up with the answer. Now, if you look at the present scenario, this systematic reviews or meta-analysis is gaining a huge importance in the industry. Because why? It saves your time. Basically saves your time in answering many questions. Okay, and provides you a clear-cut picture that what you need to do after this. So like in our PhD or whatever we do, like a literature review. So similarly, for industries, they require a meta-analysis or systematic review for a particular question, what they, for an answer for a particular question, what they are seeking for. Okay. So high quality SRs can save time and give a clear picture. So these are the various like agencies for healthcare research quality. These are various examples of various sites where you can go for finding out your systematic reviews for any particular topic, okay, or a particular diagnosis or a drug. So effective healthcare, then we have Cochrane, which is very much used. And then we have Center for Reviews and Dissemination. And there is another one like database of abstracts of reviews of effects. Okay, that is known as a DARE. So this is your Cochrane library. I'll just give you a glimpse of that database where you can, so you can search over here the title or a keyword which you want. So this is a trusted evidence, informed decisions for better health. So there are various answers, Cochrane reviews on various trials, clinical answers you are going to find. Then this is your University of York Center for Reviews and Dissemination. You can see there, this is a database where you can just enter your fields, title or your any field you want. See, these are the Boolean operators. Can you see? Even the database also use these Boolean operators. So whether you have two synonymous words, like I'll just give you an example, like when we search, we have COVID-19, we have SARS-CoV, like that also, right? So if you search with only COVID-19, you will get specific papers which have a title of COVID-19. So it will not reflect you SARS. So if you put SARS also, then it will reflect you SARS. So the searching is an art. And for that, it requires that you need to have a proficiency in how to apply a search technology or methodology. This is a traditional review, typically lack systematic review. Okay, rigorous critical appraisal is not done in these traditional reviews. It is more of an opinion rather than unbiased, what you can say, unbiased review of the literatures. Moreover, you can say it is a biased review, or it could be a confusing state, or there could be selective literatures. They may not have taken all the literatures. Most of them, they actually give the support the author's viewpoint. So if you go into any medical literatures, you will find such type of non-systematic reviews more. So this is from PubMed Central. You can see these are the various article types which you want, like clinical trial, meta-analysis, RCTs. So I have put reviews over here, and for hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine safety, and I received like 9 or 10 on that. So these are various reviews. Now, if I go for like systematic review and I switch off this and I tick systematic review, I'll get 6 to 7 systematic reviews on hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine like that. So now, any person who is doing this, he needs to understand that when I am going for a drug, whether systematic reviews will be available or not. So I will start my order with the highest evidence. Then I will move to the lower evidence if I am not getting higher evidences. If I am getting higher evidence, I should not waste my time in looking into those case reports, case series, and looking into those various trials, observational trial reports. I will not waste my time in that. So the person who wants to answer a particular question, he should be very much skilled in understanding that how I should search and what I should look for. I'll give you examples through various cases. You'll come to understand how to save your time in that. Now, there are clinical practice guidelines also. They are also considered to be one of the best in the evidence level pyramid. They are very broader in scope, okay, than your systematic reviews. And always remember, these guidelines actually influence the practice, because many of the physicians, they practice through this guideline, and they are trained to practice through this guideline. And in Western world or in Western countries, it is a mandatory that a follow to a guideline is very much essential. Even in our hospital also, when we look for like epilepsy, like status epilepticus management, we see a protocol has been devised, and that protocol is a particular guideline. It is an abstract of a particular guideline which has been being followed in our hospital. And when we try to find out the outcome after following that guideline, you can see that whenever the physicians follow a practice guideline and implement it within time, then the outcome is very good. That is what is expected, because these guidelines are made to improve your practice, okay, with minimal side effects or adverse effects, and maximizing the benefits, as well as, if you look, reducing the cost by reducing your or declining your or decreasing your hospital stay and other complications. Okay, so that's why clinical practice guidelines are always accepted and practiced in many of the hospitals. So, and any clinical practice guideline, if you read a practice guideline, you'll find that this practice guideline is are made by experts in those fields, and they make these practice guidelines through various evidences. And again, in these evidences, these studies are there. Okay, so this clinical practice guidelines, they also vary in quality. There are nearly 2,500 guidelines available. Then high quality guidelines have two major components. Always we need to remember that they have a systematic review of evidences and specific recommendations, okay, of a graded strength. Now, these are various examples of your, like, where you can get those guidelines, like National Guidelines Clearinghouse, New Zealand Guidelines Group, National Institute of Health and Clinical Excellence, NICE guidelines, then Veterans Health Administration. Okay, so these are various guidelines sites where a student or anyone can go through and find out a guideline and go through that guideline to answer the specific query. Another one is your FDA website, and FDA website can really provide you information if you are looking for data regarding new drugs. Okay, so advisory panel transcripts can contain wealth of information, including over there. So not published or analysis of FDA staff, information about unresolved issues and post-marketing requirements can be available. I'll just show you in the next slide how. And drug approval letter and product labeling also can be accessed through this FDA guideline. And this should be used. Like ivermectin, people were thinking of, or many of the scientists were thinking of using ivermectin to prevent or treat COVID-19. So you can get many explanations on FDA and the status of ivermectin in the management of COVID. Like you can see, is there any emergency use or authorization for ivermectin? So the answers are there. FDA has created a special emergency program for possible therapies. Okay, but it uses every available method to move new treatments. So what is ivermectin approved for in the US. So ivermectin tablets are approved for use in humans for some parasitic worms. So it has not yet been approved, or it has not yet been, or it is under study. So through FDA, you can get data related to label changes, okay, contraindications. So any new actions has been taken on that particular drug. So sometimes you need to refer these sites if your question or query demands such type of search. The another one is your information which are given by the manufacturer. That is your package insert. So every drug, most of the drugs, if you see, they have a package insert about that particular product. Okay, and this is, if you want to conduct a new drug review of your studies based on a new drug, then you will get to know many of these things from a particular product leaflet. Suppose your query is about certain brand, and you don't know that how that what is the information about that brand related to its harms or side effects or adverse effects. Fine. So you can look into this package insert of that brand. So that is a very quickest way of getting into information or to a resource. So always a person who has devised the query, or the query that has come up to you about certain, the evidences you look for should be very fast and quick and effective, so that you don't waste your time in just beating around the bush. Okay, so you need to be very quick. What is required, and which site I need to see, whether I should go for a FDA label site or I should go for a package insert to get my answers. I have given you like an Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy dossier format. You can see this is a AMCP organization. It's a professional association. And this professional association is very specialized in expertise in clinical evidence and economics. So they cater the need of providing serious answers towards various queries related to drugs. Okay, drugs and its effectiveness and its safety, and even about its economic analysis. So these are the various organizations which also play an important role in carrying out the safety of or drug utilization, rational use of drugs through an evidence-based practice. Now let's take a few clinical scenarios. Like we have 3 questions, like what is the risk of tramadol among those with osteoarthritic pain? Then what is the risk of hydroxychloroquine among those with COVID-19? Question 3, like what is the risk of ivermectin among those with COVID-19? So I would like to search, and I'd like to frame a query. Already I have shown you with one example. I will just give amongst these 3, I'll give you 1 or 2 how it is done. Now, what is the risk of tramadol in the osteoarthritic pain? If you look, I have devised a search strategy, like I have taken tramadol, then osteoarthritic pain, because this is not a single word. These are 2 words. This is a phrase basically. And when we take a phrase, we have to put it in the inverted commas. Okay. And when we put this in inverted commas, then it will bring you those articles which has this phrase. So in this way, you reduce your search ambiguity. Okay, otherwise what will happen, you'll get numerous articles, and you can't sit and read all those articles abstract. So you need to be very specific in actually putting your search title criteria, okay, terms or keywords. So like I have put like tramadol, then I have gone for osteoarthritic pain in inverted, like then I have gone for like safety. So this bracket, what I have given over TI, this is title, means I am asking the database to search those articles where the title is tramadol, osteoarthritic pain. The title consists of these 3 things: tramadol, osteoarthritic, and safety. So when we try to tell the students, we tell them that you just look for these words, then you, and below also there will be suggested articles. From their suggested articles, you will get many other keywords to refine your search. Okay, so always try to refine the search to get more specific articles related to your studies. Then you need to apply the filters like for RCTs you want, or you want systematic reviews, or you want narrative reviews. Even you can go for like case reports, case series, whatever the need is. Then what is the risk of hydroxychloroquine. Here also I have put like and, these are the Boolean operators. So I have tried to find out how many. So like all systematic. So like hydroxychloroquine is a well-known drug. So when I get a query or I put up a question like this, or somebody put up a question to me like this, that what is the safety of hydroxychloroquine in COVID? Or somebody puts up the question like, what is the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine in COVID? Then I cannot just answer, yes, I was listening in a news channel and they were showing that Trump said he is taking hydroxychloroquine for so long and he is fit enough. On that basis, we cannot judge and give our reply. In scientific world, we need to have evidences, scientific evidences. So what I will do, I will go into the PubMed and or various other databases, and I will try to search that what evidences are available to prove that hydroxychloroquine is efficacious or safe. What are the safety parameters that has to be looked for, or how safe it is. So what I will do, I will go for systematic reviews first. Whether are there any systematic reviews or meta-analysis that appears in that website or not. So when I try to put this, I found various systematic reviews, nearly 7 systematic reviews or meta-analysis. Then I tried to formulate my answer after reading those 7 papers, at least the full papers. Then I will try to make my answers in this, like there were no significant difference in the probability of viral transmission or clearance in prophylaxis. The strongest evidence points towards inefficacy of hydrochloroquine in prophylaxis. Hydrochloroquine alone, when used, revealed benefits in severely infected COVID-19. Since it is not beneficial in mild to moderate situations, then why to unnecessarily expose the patient to a hydroxychloroquine? Even you will get papers of chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. So what you can do in search criteria, you can put chloroquine/hydroxychloroquine. That way also you can search. Okay, so that will bring the papers which will have both chloroquine as well as hydroxychloroquine. Now people have also done research like chloroquine and azithromycin. Even they have done that also. So if you want to see that hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin macrolides, what is the outcome compared to standard treatment protocol? Your comparator could be a standard treatment protocol, which is usually like those inflammatory mediators reduction. You give painkillers, you go for various anti-inflammatory drugs. Okay, so with standard care, what is the outcome? So that is also can be searched. Okay. So hydroxychloroquine alone did not reveal significant changes in the mortality rate. So again, mortality rate was not clinically significant. Viral clearance was not significant. Now, if you see, we have found that like 44% found a greater incidence of QTC, prolongation or arrhythmia, in whatever 7 RCTs we have come across. And 44% of them, they found no evidence of significant difference. And 11%, they have a mixed result of this. So low and moderate risk of bias is there. So what is the bias status? There are biasness in the studies, okay, because RCTs are very less conducted. Most of them are trials, clinical trials, randomization was improper, or blinding was not there. So probably that could have also biased the study. So those also you need to provide the answer, or you need to formulate the answer. You cannot leave that part. Okay. So critically appraisal is that when you appraise through various ways, and then you imply it, like HCQ alone can be used in severely infected COVID-19 patients. Otherwise, using in mild to moderate is clinically insignificant in COVID-19 conditions. And risk is monitoring of cardiac adverse effects is a must in that patient. And probably the patients who have a decompensated heart or suffering from cardiovascular problems, you need to avoid, or it is contraindicated. That is what the implication or suggestion is. Now, the next one is like, what is the risk of ivermectin with COVID-19? Now, I don't know whether ivermectin, how many research or how many research has been done. I am unaware. So what I did, I went to PubMed and I tried to find out about ivermectin. So I tried to like safety and ivermectin and COVID-19. What I found, I did not found any article published related to ivermectin use, but I found protocols, means that gave me a hint that probably ivermectin has not yet been studied, or it is still under study, or there are recruitment going on. So now quickly what I will do, I will go into another site, a relevant site where I will try to find out whether ivermectin is being studied. That's why the results are not available on the PubMed. So then I go to clinicaltrials.gov and I try to search giving the various conditions and keywords over here, and I try to search. And what I found that there are 4-5 research going on ivermectin, which is where the patients are getting recruited and the results are not yet published. Here also you will find various filters to be used, and requirement, depending upon your requirement, you can apply the filters and you can refine your search criteria. So next comes, what are the barriers to EBP, evidence-based practice or evidence-based medicine in this. So there are barriers which are discussed in literatures, or what we see that a limited time, skills, because this is nothing but your skill area, where how to search, what terms you are using, then reading those and formulating, appraising and formulating an answer and disseminating the answer and then follow. So it requires a skill and time and confidence about that level of evidence. That is very important. How confident you are on that value of that evidence, and what all support you get to conduct this. Because if you don't have resources, obviously you will not be able to do your EBM practice. The limitations are like studies may not answer the question. See, many of the studies, like in systematic reviews, you will find like they will tell you that more studies are required. There are insufficient studies which do not provide you the answers. Okay, so even the clarity will not be there. Evidences may be lacking because low quality evidences are there. Then the body of evidence continues to change. Surrogate endpoints, they might have taken other sub judice endpoints rather than your primary endpoints. And if you look into the fact says that about 2/3 of 9,400 graded recommendations in up to date, they are all supported by weak evidences. Even in American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association practice guidelines, who have issued many of those guidelines between 1984 and 2008, only 11% of these 2,711 recommendations are classified as level evidence A based upon your randomized or meta-analysis. So you can understand that it has not yet deeply rooted into the system. And second thing, many of the things are also dependent on the clinician's judgment, looking into the individual patient parameters. Okay. So I discussed the barrier initially, so that when I come into the advantages at the end, we should take the positivity of EBM approach. Otherwise, what happens, many of them, they discuss the limitations at the end, but the limitations should be discussed earlier and then the advantages, so that we can know that what benefits are there and we could take a positive note of that and go ahead. So guides prescribing decisions to get predictable improvements. This is a guide which gives you or helps you in predicting your improvement in the patient or in the patient outcomes. Okay. Now it helps you in various areas. It does not only help you in your practice, medicine practice, in marketing, in opinions, making a theory, conducting other research. Okay, even in your own PhD research also, we can use EBM to devise a necessary question on which a further study can be taken up in a PhD or postdoctoral research. Okay, so accurate assessments of benefits and risks of various treatments can be done, can help to identify and target the opportunities so that the drug therapy can be improved. EBM assists in decision-making process, and with those decision-making process, it can reduce the healthcare cost, and it can reduce the patient burden on the patient and on the healthcare system as well, where insurance is a big asset. And if you look, insurance is coming into picture, and it is going to penetrate like anything in our developing countries and developing countries like us. So where insurance will come into picture, obviously this EBM will be the most sought after thing, because everybody will look into the lowest investment with better outcome. Hence, the costing should be low and the therapeutic outcome should be maximized. So everybody will be focusing on that. And finally, EBM provides incentives to conduct useful research in that sense. So if I summarize my whole talk today, using an evidence-based process, it helps us in prescribing, in dispensing, okay, and any queries which comes up to us. As a pharmacist, the queries can come up from various specialists to us, even doctors to us, because they don't have time to conduct all this work or conduct these EBM studies and try to find out the relevant answers. So a pharmacist has a greater opportunity in these areas, particularly hospital and clinical pharmacists, because we till now we were only looking into procurement and dispensing of medications and inventory control. But now, actually, if you see, a pharmacist has a greater role in play if he steps into this EBM process, where he can help to a physician to take or make a decision in treating his or her patient. Okay. So there are numerous sources of high quality systematic reviews and clinical practice guidelines, and they all provide a sound framework of drug therapy decisions. Thank you. Any questions? Please, you can ask. See, EBM is a very huge topic. It itself is a course. Means if you want to go for like searching strategies, then appraising for systematic reviews, the appraising criterias are there. Then for then critically reviewing your RCTs, there are set of criteria, 10 to 11 criteria, and you need to evaluate on that aspect, and then you need to tick that. So it's a huge scientific tool basically, and it requires a lot of time to learn and understand. Thank you. Any questions? I'll be glad to answer.
Yes, thank you very much, Panda sir, for your very much informative and nice session, right? And especially the practice of evidence-based medicine is really very important, especially for most effective care and most effective benefits to the patients. So on this note, I welcome the questions from the participants. They can ask directly better, and also has option if they are typing in the chat box. Yes, you can directly ask, so that will be the better. So evidence-based system. So one question I have, Panda sir, especially in case
Yes,
of
yes.
investigational drugs, how can
Yes,
we
yes.
explore? How can we explore this that is investigation evidence-based medicine? Because as there is a lack of the authenticate data, and as the investigational drugs are there, so how can
Sir,
we? Yeah.
regarding investigational drugs, we will first look into the clinical trial site. So
Okay.
we will come to know that whether that investigational drug, how many studies are being conducted, and in which countries and in which area, and in
Okay.
which indication. So there we will get a brief data about it. Then we will sort out that whether those data are published or not, because they are all RCT studies. They are high level evidence studies. Because
Okay.
when we conduct an investigational drug, we have to go for a RCT study. We can't go for any other studies besides.
Okay. Okay.
So first trial, then in the
Mhm.
trial only we will come to know whether those data are published or not. If the data are published, then we will go into their published results.
Okay.
And then we will critically evaluate the results and FDA site about the
FDS.
status of that particular investigational drug.
Okay. So authenticate data, if you need to get, that should be the hierarchy, which site we need to prefer, that is FDA or then various
Sir, you
multi-trial
can't
studies.
rely
Then
on one, because
yeah, okay,
every
okay,
database has its own purpose.
Right.
So you have to sort out those various databases, and always we think of like primary sources are very good, like the journals where it has get published, like if that investigational drug in FDA site, because if that results are published, then you will get it in the FDA site, and that is the most authenticated one.
Okay, thank you. So anyone?
So I hope no more questions are there.
So anyone, if you want to ask. So thank you once again, Panda
Thank
sir,
you, sir.
for
Thank you.
sharing your expertise and especially sharing your time. Right. Thank you
It's
once
my
again.
pleasure, and I'm grateful that the organizer has given me a opportunity to keep my talk
Yes.
on EBL.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Panda sir, for accepting our invitation and delivering a wonderful talk.
Hello.
With this, we are done with the morning session. Our next session will start from 2 p.m. So meet you all after the lunch for the next amazing session.